That's the idea of the story, is they're hunting a serial killer who is going to target what the culture thinks are increasingly valuable targets. It starts off with somebody who's homeless. And why do we think that that's not worth working? Why do we think that that case is not as important as a celebrity who gets murdered? Why is it that someone like this can get killed in America and nobody will even report it on the news? Yet the celebrity gets killed, it'll be a national, international headline. Like, why do we think that one person has got more value than another? We want to explore that because we think the best answer for how you could determine someone's value is not in their celebrity or what they've achieved, or how much money they have, or what family they came from. It's going to be we are image bearers of the God who created us. And we want to be able to talk about that as a better answer to the question, but we want to do it in a way that doesn't smack you in the face from the very first, panel. If we want to do it in a way that is subtle, and then when all of the characters in this are struggling with the answer, we're going to float an answer that we think is the best answer. But it's also going to leave people, I think, thinking about, well, is that the best answer? And so we want to be able to, and so if you've got people who say, I don't want to hear the gospel, well, how about we just talk about the good things that come along with it? That might open your mind to being willing to listen to the gospel. And that's what we hope this book will do.
No, that's awesome. As you say, it doesn't hit you in the face on page 1. I'll say it hits you in the gut on page 154. Because when I read it, I was like, wow. All right, guys, welcome back to the 19th installment of the Peterstrom Initiative podcast. Tonight, my guests are none other, as you see here, than J. Warner Wallace up to my left. It might be you guys right. And Jimmy Wallace over to my right. Might be your left, however it looks like. But here's green there. There recently did a awesome graphic novel, Case Files, Murder and Meaning, as I was telling Jimmy before. When they sent me the email to come on, they wanted to come on to the podcast and review the book. I was like, I was expecting the book to be good, but I wasn't expecting it to be number 1 on my list coming in to it after reading it, and it's just been awesome. So guys, without further ado, how are you guys doing tonight as we just get into the background and some questions for you guys?
Oh, it's awesome. I mean, we actually reached out to you because we Jimmy's actually a legitimate comic book fan who reads a lot of comic books. That's part of his collection, just the part that fits in the camera behind him there, and so we knew you were out there and doing these kinds of reviews. So we definitely were curious to see what you would think. When you do this kind of thing, you just not quite sure if you can cross over into fiction. We've written a lot about the Christian worldview on our website and in other books, but this is the first time we ever tried to do anything in a fictional realm. So we weren't quite sure how it would land. And also there's this extra added dimension, of course, that this is an entirely visual book. So if you don't partner with the right artists, then it's not going to really come to life the way that it did. And we just got really fortunate, God bless this project because he allowed us to work with artists that were way above our pay grade. So we felt like, hey, this is the opportunity to try something that's a little bit outside the box for us. But we are writing about the stuff that we probably know best, which is the kind of detective stuff anyway. So it was probably a good genre for us to start in for sure.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I'm doing it. I know I was already telling you a little bit about this before, but I'm excited to be on with you because as we went into doing this project, I was thinking more and more about Christian comics. And as a lifelong comic reader, of course, I would occasionally run into Christian comic books. I remember being a kid and finding I was in a small little town in Texas, kind of where my family lives. And there's this antique store. And in one corner, there was a bunch of the Spire Christian comics. I don't know if you've seen these. They're Virtue Comics, Christian. And so I found those and I was like, oh my gosh, Christian Archie comics. It's was so crazy to me as a young Christian kid. And I would always kind of keep an eye out. I always had the attitude that if I found a Christian comic, I would do everything I could to buy it. Usually Christian comics aren't being sold for ridiculous prices because There's not very many of them out there, and I think most comic shops don't even think there's much of a demand. And so I would look for them, but I never really found that many. And so I think I had this perception that there just simply weren't that many out there. And I guess there's still there aren't. I mean, it's not as big as the non-Christian market, but in the last few years, when we started doing this project, I'm thinking more and more about Christian comics. I'm thinking about, hey, what have people done in the past? I was like, hey, I should make a really concerted effort. In the past, all I would do is Google Christian comic book and just kind of see what came up. And there's no like, I wish there was one database, one website that would just list all of them, so you could figure out what's out there. But instead, everything is like kind of in a patchwork. And one of the places I found was your channel. And you open my eyes to tons of comics modern comics that are coming out right now that I had never even heard of. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, I'm pretty locked in. I know what's on the comics market. I know what's coming out, what's like current. I had no idea. So I'm very thankful for your channel. And that's probably why I wanted to come on and touch base with you is you've helped me on my comics journey. So I figured we might as well chat about it.
No, that's awesome. Because that was only things with me. Finding like just the push towards just elevating other brothers and sisters around the world doing their own things. But it's like one of the comics we covered last year was just someone's thing. One of their, I think it was social studies in they're in Bible school and social studies, and she decided to do a comic strip, and it was just this allegory on abortion. And in reading it, I was like, wow, like just to see the different styles that people do all over them is remnant with all the expansive amounts of like that series it's crazy to think about that is a series that has 33 published issues in our space. And then there's Starcross and all of them. But the thing was, it was hard to find anyone. You had to like jump either to like know the person, like know the creator, or go, as Jimmy said, deep diving down the keyword. You have to like do the triple keyword search, the verbatim searches in Google in order to actually like come near any of it. So that was just like the drive to just elevate other brothers and sisters in the Lord that are just pushing forward in the creative field. And then when you guys said that you have a comic that you want me to review, as I said, when I was telling Jimmy, when I got the email, I thought, oh, cool. I don't know who's mailing this up on, because your email actually went to promotions. It didn't come into my inbox at first.
Sure.
In
other words, you want hit the spam folder.
Yeah,
So that means thanks. That's great.
Yeah. So I'm like, oh, who's mailing list I'm on? This is looking really cool. And then when I read the bottom, like, we would like to comment to your podcast. I'm like, wait, this is way too specific for just a random spot.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, you guys are reaching out to come on. So it's just awesome.
Well, we actually we knew we were. Jimmy told me we got to get on this podcast, so we were focused to get to you, and I'm glad you eventually dug it out of your spam folder because I think this is. Why do you guys think it is though? It is an interesting question if you think about it. Like, why do you think it is that we don't see a lot of work in this Christian space? Because, we've always heard the criticism that the Christian creative world is like kind of like a B team to everything else that's out there. But if there are artists who are working in this Christian space, is it quality? What is it that's keeping Christian artists from blossoming, do you think?
Jimmy, you could go first, but I could add on.
Oh, yeah. I really don't know if I have a good answer. I wonder if it's just like a fear of, we're fortunate because my dad here is retired and I work full time in another field. And so we were able to do this comic, like as a side project, and we didn't have to worry, like if it's a complete bomb and we make no money from it, it's okay. Because this isn't like our primary, income, but I got to imagine if you're a full-time comics guy, even if you are truly gifted, if you try to go into religious comics, how many people are going to follow you? I remember, I don't know if you're, I'm sure you're familiar with him, but I don't know if you're a big fan or not of Mike Allred. He did like Silver Surfer and Madman and stuff like that. I'm a huge Mike Allred fan as an artist. And I don't know if he still is, but he grew up Mormon. And maybe in the early 2000s, he decided, hey, I'm going to go and start making Mormon comic books. And here he's like an A-list comics creator. Everybody has nothing but good things to say about him. I'm sure he has multiple of the Eisner Awards. Like, he's a big deal, but I think he made like 3 issues. And then he self-published, and then he had to go back to secular stuff. And I don't know if that had anything to do with his religious beliefs or not, if he left the church or whatever. But I just think it must be hard if even he can't sell big numbers of his religious comic, and he is like at the top of his game. I'm sure there's a lot of fear of like, hey, if this is my full-time job, I just can't get into it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Interesting. What do you think, Xavier?
Which is actually, you think if there's a Christian company that could come alongside and say, hey, we can pay you a living wage and we'll find the audience for you, you know, like, I feel like there's this fear that there's no Christians that read comics. And we all know that there's so many Christians that read comics. Every church group, every Bible study I ever was with, there was always somebody there that I could find that was a big comics person who probably would read good Christian comics if they knew they existed and how to find them.
Interesting.
Yeah. I would say definitely from at least the prior guests and the other creatives that we've brought on and stuff we review is mainly audience. Because it's like a lot of the guys that that we've had on, the Rob and the Joe Spicer, a lot of it is like what started off as, you know, just the love and passion. It's to the point where one book covers the next book, but then
Right.
a main factor with it as well is like the adoption, like at least now, so you know, like I would say 7 years, Christians have really embraced media most of it. Like it's no longer that catch all bracket. Like I'm sure you guys been, but probably haven't hosted one, but been to one of those been to a seminar or adjacent where it was like media for a long time was a catch-all media evil. Comics, movies, TV, and a lot of those guys get that pushback. Of the other creators that have come on, they get that even like within Christian spaces, they still get that because it's like the parents are the ones who like buy this stuff for the kid. And when they carry it to the parents are like, oh, well, comics are something demonic or bad. I don't want my child eating this and stuff. And that's another aspect of it where it's like, no, there's just that nowadays, at least now it's growing, there's the Instagram, as Jimmy and I were talking about beforehand, there's like Instagram pages dedicated to like bringing up lost Christian media, like old school. Well, I'm saying old school. I'm saying old school, but we were like, not to date, but like things from the 90s.
Yeah.
It was like old school Christian media. And now it's like that more so that media, I'd say a media renaissance in a sense for a lot of Christian themed work. When it comes to like video games, for example, like I work with Daniel Mertz of the LM Christian Lifestyle on his game development company, and in his Bible X that's launching. There's like many other forms of Christian, there's Christians within this space like getting into media. Now the audience is finally like flocking towards it. Before there was that media bad in a lot of Christian spaces, or even other brothers and sisters. It was like, oh, well, I'm not even going to give this Christian thing a chance because every time I read a Christian thing, it's just been cheesy. So it has lost that kind of goodwill for a while. And now, with like coming around now, everyone is like giving it a chance. And we're like I would say we're like at the floor of, I honestly believe we're at the floor of what is going to be like the rise of Christian entertainment in all aspects, whether it be, but Chosen is big, that's a big one. Or like some books that are coming out that people are actually like gravitating toward.
Interesting. Yeah, just curious.
We're very like fortunate for The Chosen, because I'm not sure if you know this, but the reason we were able to do this project is because of The Chosen TV show. The Chosen TV show wanted to do a comic book adaptation, and they got this small company in Colorado to start doing a mini series based on the first season. And after I think 6 issues or so, the company that was producing them was purchased by a Christian book publisher called David C. Cook, who's ended up publishing our comic. And they took that comics team and said, hey, we want to go into the graphic novel space. So they created a new studio, a new imprint for them, Correct Studios, and they did a their own version and adaptation of The Chosen. And then as their second project, we were fortunate enough to basically talk them into letting us have a shot at it.
Awesome.
So yeah, I think maybe there is like a snowball effect that, hey, but Chosen is popular. They can get a comic. Oh, hey, the comic's good enough where we can do something else. So I hope you're right that that the tides are turning, because as a Christian, I want to have more media that I can just watch and be like, hey, this is good. And I can be pretty much feel good that I'm watching it. I don't have to be like, oh man, it was great, except I wish there wasn't that one scene with objectionable material or with a weird theological teaching or something like that. So I hope that's the case.
Because I also believe, me personally, well, I stay out of it. In particular, is more so what has been happening with the culture war in entertainment for a while now, within the past 2-3 years, on just like the turning in. This is stuff in media that people are starting up and like, okay, no, I don't want this. I no longer want this in my shows, and the push that has been going on in the show. But at the same time, I also do my best to warn at least some Christian creatives that is to remember as well that with the culture war and everything, with the culture war and everything, sometimes the opposite side of the pendulum is not the same as righteousness. So give an example where it's like, I don't know how tapped in you guys are with nerd culture and stuff, where it's like games and they have turned from the pushes, the LGBTQ pushes that they're doing in it, to now it's like, if they're scantily clad, that's a moneymaker. And it's like, that's not really same as we went from one extreme to the other. But I'm hoping that out of everything rises just like those, as Evan David says, which Evan David is actually works on the Crux Studios team. He has said with their chosen book as well, is that push up gospel infused entertainment. That is like rising up as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's my hope. And what's interesting about this is that we had the opportunity to work with artists that have the same values, and that makes a huge difference. So we've got to credit the artists in this, because they are the ones who decide, for example, what a character looks like, what a character will wear, what a background, what are the scenes going to be, all those issues. So anyway, but I'm digressing now. But I know you had some questions for us. I don't want to get us too much in a rabbit trail, but I wanted to get your opinion on why you thought that was the case. So anyway.
No, that was awesome. That was an awesome question to add there. I think that was an enjoyable tangent for everyone. Me, you, too. I know what you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, let's get down to some of the questions regarding the book. More so on well, the first question is more so, tell me what about like your guys just background in law enforcement. As I disclosed in the video a couple ways in, my understanding of your guys' like life field is as good as a Brooklyn Nine-Nine Funny Moments compilation and Law and Order when I watched it, but I was too young to be watching Law and Order and stuff. So like, just tell me about your guys' background in law enforcement and stuff.
Yeah, so I was born in my dad's academy. So my dad was a cop first, and he was there for the first 30 years of the Wallaces at this agency, and he has our name too. We all have the same name. And so I was born in his academy. I took over. I didn't get a chance to work with my dad. We didn't have any overlap, but Jimmy and I had some overlap when I left and he came on the job. So he's been there. So we've been there since 1961. So we've been there for now, 64 years, coming up on 64 years, either my dad or me or Jimmy. And basically, there's just so much you can do in a law enforcement career. It's great. There's lots of options. But if you're there about the same amount of time that we've all been there, you're going to end up doing the same assignments at some point. I think the only thing that we both have done that my dad didn't get a chance to do is we both worked in a division where we get to work in assignments that are unusual investigations. My dad, he became a sergeant pretty quick and then went back to patrol. So we've had probably a little more time working in investigations even than my dad did. I think Jimmy right now has probably surpassed the number of years that my dad spent in detectives before he promoted. So we're trying to leverage that, right? We're trying to leverage like this time we've had working in investigations to write about other guys and gals who are working in investigations, because we met so many people along the way. I think, Jimmy, am I wrong? I think most of these people are people who are very much like the people we met doing the job. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, he kind of covered. I come from this long line of law enforcement family, and we all have different experiences in our careers, but we all have we can all tell a story that happened at the same intersection. And if we're sitting the three of us together, now it might be a different story. I know an intersection that in my day was a built up, more urban type of environment. My grandfather would tell a story. Oh yeah, I used to park there on my breaks when it was strawberry fields. So okay, maybe it's a little different in terms of specifics, but we all work this main general area and at a different time. And here I grow up the son of a Christian apologist. My dad, even when he was working as a police officer, he wasn't a full-time into apologetics, but he was my youth leader or my children's leader, or we did a house church for a while. He was always a strong Christian influence in my life. And he was always, he might not have been a big comics fan himself, but he was always a big encourager of my love of comics and of all the nerd stuff. I think he kind of got me into it because he wasn't maybe a comics guy, but he loved Star Trek. We watched action movies. So there's some crossover there, And so for me, I think there were three loves that I had growing up that I took into my adulthood that kind of eventually transitioned into making this comic book, which was a love of police work. As a little kid, if you asked me what I want to be, I wanted to be a police officer like my dad. And I just never grew out of that. I don't know if I was supposed to, but I didn't. Here I am, still in law enforcement. I love comics and I loved faith, and especially I liked when I was a little kid, my dad became a Christian when I was 8 years old. And immediately, because of his personality, him and all his closest friends would argue theology at the dinner table. And as a kid, I loved that. My experience of faith was always tied into asking these very difficult questions and seeing what was Christianity's answer. So when we were like, hey, we can do a comic book together, what do we want to do? I want to do a comic book about police work and trying to ask at least big life questions that Christianity has a good answer for.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, and I think that's why these things become organic. It's why you don't plan on doing these things. You don't plan on, at least we didn't. But I think because Jimmy reads so many comics, his comic book collection is pretty deep, that if you read a lot, then you have the opportunity to write. And you can't really be a good writer unless you have read a lot. That's why most people who write apologetics books probably know everybody else's apologetics book. And they know what this guy said, and that guy said, and this lady said, and that professor said, and what does Nancy Piercy say about it? And what is, all the different really smart people, they write books, and we have them all, and we read them all. Then that prepares us to write something new. Well, this is the same thing with Jimmy with these books. I mean, I've always loved, I'm just an impatient person. So my first go-to is probably not fiction. My first go-to is data, right? Because I'm getting ready to present something and I need the data. I need to know what's the evidence, and then I can make a case. So I don't often give myself the luxury of even we don't watch many fictional dramas on TV or movies. So my wife and I are pretty much, for the most part, just listening to sermons. That's our first go-to thing. Is there a pastor out there like a Tim Keller who's got an apologetics approach that we can listen to? That would be probably our first choice. So that's why you need someone, though, who's got this hunger and this real love of fiction and love of comic books. So I can come alongside Jimmy and just maybe kind of help him with a question here or there. But to be honest, you have to be a lover and a reader of comics, a voracious reader of comics, I think, to do it well. And so that's why I felt really comfortable when the opportunity came. If I could partner. Now, if they would have asked me, hey, can you? No, I probably couldn't. I mean, I could maybe give you some advice, but to write this panel by panel, page by page, scene by scene with the dialogue and the commentary and all that, it's hard. And I was glad that he was able to do it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's some background load there. So the whole as well, what you were just saying, because it's of course it's the father-son duo writing credits. So what was that writing as well? I know you were just expounding it a bit more. What was that? It probably wasn't day to day, but what was the, I don't know, the calls and stuff like that? Jimmy, were you the one who was he supplying you with the information and you turn it into the Perez and the Murph and the Joe, or was it what was the idea came to what it was? What percentage of it was that you were supplying J1 and what was like that Jimmy was supplying?
I'll let Jimmy answer that because I think he's got so control of this.
Well, when we first started talking about it, we were like, hey, what's the genre? What do we want to stick with? But really, we felt like this is our background, and this is where a lot of my dad's ministry had started. His biggest book, Cold Case Christianity, that was like what started his writing career, and it's focused on, hey, this is my experience in law enforcement. Let me use this as a tool to communicate something about Christianity with you.
Yeah.
And I think that's what our goal is here. We're sticking with the law enforcement thing because it's something we know, but also something that we just generally understand that some people out there might have some passing interest. You might not have any interest in faith, but maybe you'll stick around for a police story. So, okay, we'll tell you a police story, and then maybe you'll stick around while we talk to you a little bit about faith on the interspersed there on the backside. Yeah. So we want to stick with a crime or detective story. When we were first pitching the story to David C. Cook, what we did was we each came up with 6 things. I came up with 6 sort of generic, or not generic characters that I thought we could plug into any character, any story, any police story. And I wanted each of those 6 detectives to feel like some type of person that we've worked with and that had some sort of variety amongst themselves. So they're not too similar to one another, and that they really represented each person. And they're not like they're a real person. We just changed their name, but they feel real enough where if you were in law enforcement or you have a cousin, a brother who's a cop or whatever, you might see one of these 6 and be like, oh yeah. And that way he's like the person I work with or that I know.
Yeah.
And my dad came up with 6 plot ideas, and we sat down and we said, okay, we'll take those 6 plots. We actually combined them into 2 because we did 2 pitches for the publisher. And we took the characters and we started to tweak them so that they would fit better in those specific stories. So now like the individual motivations are going to be moved a little bit towards how they're going to fit in the story. And we pitched these basic plots, which were like probably a paragraph or 2 with the character descriptions to the publisher. And they we were able to trick them into agreeing to 2 books. Hopefully we will still have a second one that we're currently working on that still becomes. But that's how we ended up here was the plot of the volume 1 and the villain are probably predominantly my dad. The main characters are probably predominantly me. But then we started writing out like a basic outline. We'd go back and forth, make some edits, a more detailed, hey, how we're going to break it down by chapter. We'd go back and forth, make edits. Then we did a script and we went back and forth. So it was a very revision heavy process. I don't know if we're getting like way too deep in the behind the scenes here, but for me, I don't know. I've never written a comic before. I don't know what is typical. But for us, this is what worked. And we're both so busy that we could do some phone calls, but it was usually we could talk generally about it, and then it was just better to put it to paper and then go back and forth, editing stuff, sending it back with comments, and going from there.
And keep in mind, that's just all how you build scripts, right? So it would have been different. Like if Jimmy didn't have a co-writer, or I didn't have a co-writer, you wouldn't have this back and forth. You'd just make these edits, and maybe you bounce some ideas off friends. And anytime I write a book, Jimmy's mom, my wife, is the first editor of that book, and she's really good at just kind of reading it from the common reader's perspective and saying, this doesn't really land well. This is confusing. And that helps me to kind of reorganize my thoughts. But with this, where we're going back and forth, you have to kind of like bounce these ideas off of each other and agree. And you have to learn to have a really open hand, because you can't be like stuck on, it has to be my way. No, this is, you can throw out what you think is the best thing. And at some point you have to say, okay, who gets the right of last confirmation? Who's the person who's going to say, this is it? Well, that's going to be Jimmy, because this is the book that he's writing. So I would typically, he'd send me something and I'd say, what if we did this? And sometimes we would do that. Sometimes we wouldn't. And so it's just a matter of being really collaborative. And that's before you even get to the artist, because once you get to the artist, you have to be willing to surrender your script to an artist who might look at this and say, I get the general idea, but I'll tell you what, that's going to be a lame 3 pages. How about if we change it to this? And then you have to be ready to say, and not a lot of that happened for us, but I think we were the mindset, and I know Jimmy was, of the mindset that, hey, when we get to the point where we're working collaboratively with artists, we're just going to have to be completely open-handed. This is a joint venture. Now, we also thought, like most comic books and probably most Well, I don't know what this. We always went what the standard was for a graphic novel. We wanted the artists' names on the front of the book, but because we went with a book publisher, really primarily a book publisher. It was just kind of venturing out and just had purchased a comic book division, created an imprint for we're like the second book in the imprint. Like they were looking at it like, no, this is a novel. And in a novel, you put the writer's name. Well, right away on the first page of the back cover, we'll have the artist there. And we actually fought against that. We said, no, we think the artists need to have the same billing as us. But the artists told them, no, for this graphic novel, we're happy to be on the first cover on the inside. And that's how it ended up. I think looking back, though, that's the one thing I would change and I think a lot of you tell me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of like comic book and graphic novel readers expect to see the artist getting the first or getting an important billing. And
yeah, that's usually how
one thing I would change.
Yeah, for most, it's usually author and primary illustrator, just author and the primary artist on the top billing, and then you'll have the credit page with everyone else. Or like if it's like two people, one person did half the book, the other person did half the book, then you would have all three the two artists on it.
Yeah. And so Jimmy was really impressed with the artists we got. I was too. And that's why we wanted them to get some credit for this. But they settled on the way they did it. But that's the one thing I like to change for the next one. But we'll see. We'll see. We're just so lucky. We're working on the script right now for the next one. We're talking about the script back and forth today as we're getting ready for volume 2. And that is the fun part, I think, is dreaming about what this could be. That the hard work of getting down and actually writing it, I don't envy Jimmy on that, because that's where he's going to do all this heavy lifting of conversations. What do these conversations sound like? What does this one thing that this character says here? It's going to impact something later in the story. So maybe we shouldn't say it that way. I mean, there's a lot of things like that you're thinking about, because we are writing detective mysteries, right? Like this is supposed to unwrap a mystery. So anyway, that's part of what we're, hoping to do in these books.
We got some, I think we were blessed with the artists we did get, though. We, like you're saying, we actually do have a count with essentially 2 artists who, I don't know if there's, to what degree they overlap on each other's pages, but predominantly you have like the front half, I believe, is predominantly Steve Crespo. Second half is Dario from Rossani. And Steve Crespo, I mean, he was working back in the 90s in comics, and then he got big into animation. And he worked in animation for a long time, and he's kind of coming back to the comics world. Maybe he didn't leave it all together. I shouldn't probably speak too much to their individual careers. And then Dario, wasn't familiar with him until this project, but on Instagram and stuff right now, he's posting all this stuff for Moon Knight, which I'm assuming is I don't know, maybe he's got a project coming up or something like that, or maybe he's just a fan. But I think we're pretty lucky with the artists that we end up getting, because when we pitched this and when they accepted it as a project, we really weren't sure, because it was so early in them trying to restructure this. They just made this purchase to this company. We really weren't sure who was going to be involved or what the art was going to look like. And that the artists can drastically change kind of the feel of a story. So I think we got 2 artists that did get the feel of the comic is essentially what we had in our minds. So we're really thankful for that.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is something you've talked about, Jimmy, how you write this. So like if in a movie, we're like the screenwriters, but the artists are everything else, from director to set designer to wardrobe to makeup to everything else is an artist. So you're so at the mercy of. But we were really blessed to have the people that we did, because it created the book that it created. So it was really good.
Yeah. But they did a great job, because in 161 pages, there wasn't usually like a lot of the 22 pages. There's always that's like, Jimmy, as a comic person, I'm pretty sure you've gotten it too, where you're reading and then there's just that one face that haunts you, but they like one weird proportion piece or like eyebrow something. I was surprised there was none of that in this entire book. So they did an awesome job.
Okay, good.
When I heard you say that in your review, I thought, oh, that's good. Because I wasn't really I don't think we were thinking about it that way. I mean, we knew the plot can move along because really all we're doing is just stealing ideas from the investigations we've worked. We kind of know the steps of an investigation and where they lead, and you always have, whether you like it or not, you always have like these little plot twists that are not just naturally part of a case. You think, oh, we're close. We got it. We'll be going to jail with somebody tomorrow. And then, no, it didn't work out. Okay, back to the drawing board on this. That happens all the time. So it's not like we have to invent this stuff. It's just kind of like, do you remember that case we did? We were kind of recalling stuff. But yeah, it was, that process was fun, I thought. But it does have ups and downs for sure.
Yeah, no, that was going to be my, Jimmy, you have anything you want to add to that fiction or?
I'm glad you feel like that. I think that my attitude is if the comic is, you read it and you enjoyed it, it's probably largely because of the strength of the art that carries through. So I'm just thankful. I was telling you before we started recording my biggest goal here was having never created a comic, but always dreamed about doing it. I just didn't want us to produce something that was terrible. I don't even think I was shooting for like the amazing. I just didn't want to feel like I had failed at that. And I'm so thankful that we had artists who could come and help us really take the story that we had, but really communicate in a way that the characters are expressive. When I see them, they're the way they don't always look exactly how I had them in my mind, but they feel the same. So I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, I think it also what happens too, if you think about this, is that if they would have told us, and you can kind of get a sense like you have the script, and as you're trying to illustrate it, I'm sure there would have been places where they thought, hang on, there's too much here. They'll just edit it. They'll just tell you, okay, look, that we can get to this faster. And I don't think there was really any place like that for us, Jimmy. I could be wrong if my memory serves me correctly. For the most part, there were some small text edits. But a lot of what we're trying to do too, look, remember, this isn't just a story about a homicide investigation. We're trying to communicate a piece of the Christian worldview in a way that's not overwhelming. So this is not going to be like everything that could be said about Christianity or about the gospel or even about human value. We're just going to kind of put our foot in it enough so that the reader can read that and say, yeah, like I don't even think you would know necessarily this is a Christian book until you're pretty far into it. And then like you're in it. Yeah. Okay. So there you go. So yeah. So we wanted that to be the case because we didn't want we don't want to be off-putting. Like we're trying to be winsome in this. And it turns out that the Christian worldview is winsome. And often it's not because the people who communicate it aren't communicating it the way it really is. But we thought we better be careful here to make sure that we have a really true gritty story that has got whatever happens in homicide investigations. So it is, I don't think it's a PG story. I think that if you look at what people are watching on TV, it's pretty accessible. I think now people that have seen it, I think we thought, are we writing an adult graphic novel that is like really too gruesome for young people? But everyone who's read it now is like, yeah, junior hires could read this because they're seeing it already, what they're seeing on their phones. So I think that it's real. We've written it. We tried to be as real as we could with this kind of investigation.
Yeah. No, Jimmy, I give you flowers for the in reading it. I said it in the review. There's like the yellow box narrator pages. I'm like, the way you constructed those, it does go along with the art as well. That was like the booster for those. But I was like, very rare. I say it, very rare. Do I not get bored of exposition dialogue? A lot of like pages of just exposition of character exposition and like outside perspective. Like that narrator, all seeing eyes telling you this, that, and everything. I read them like, oh, this is really interesting. So you did a really great job in that regard.
Well, that's good.
Well, thank you. I think I was fearful that I was I think I started off feeling like, hey, there's a lot of modern comics that I had been buying that I felt like, oh man, I wish there was a little bit more to it. Mostly like from like Marvel and DCs and stuff like that. And then I'm like spending money that I don't really want to spend. And then I'm like, oh man, there just wasn't a lot. So then I wanted to I want this to be dense. I wanted to do as much as possible. But then I think I got fearful that maybe we'd done too much. I don't want you to feel like, yeah, it's like work to get through it. Part of my problem is two of my big favorite comics writers are Chris Claremont, who did the X-Men back in the days, and I still like to this day. You could buy it next to he's done. And then when I was growing up, I was and I mean he's known for like enormous amounts of writing, which I enjoy, but probably he's like the exception to the rule. Like I probably shouldn't be trying to compete with him in that area. He's very verbose. He's putting a lot of words on the page. And then the other guy that I liked when I was in high school and I was just coming up was Brian Michael Bendis, was like at the peak of his popularity doing Daredevil and stuff. But he's also a guy who writes a lot. And so I see like even in the early pages of this graphic novel, I'm like, ooh, I can see that I'm maybe straying a little bit too heavy, but I hope that we got a good pacing there after as things went on, as we were learning how to do this thing. But I just wanted it to be, I wanted to feel like when you were reading this, you're getting a lot out of it. There is like some substance here. This isn't going to be, you're not going to have a 10-page sequence with like 3 lines of dialogue and a bunch of pictures, which can sometimes be great, but I just didn't want to feel like, oh, I raced through that comic and there wasn't much there.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, because there's a couple of guys that I listen to on podcasts, and I don't get as much chance to do as I'd like. I'd like to listen to them more, but I might listen a couple times a week, and they're doing 5 days a week, these guys. And one is a super fast talker. So in an hour, you're going to get so much information. He's just going to blow right through it. As a matter of fact, people complain he talks too fast. There's too much information. It's like drinking water out of a fire hose, blah, blah, blah. The other guy will unpack maybe 6 ideas, 6 stories in an hour. And so each one's going to take 10 minutes to unpack. And you can definitely listen to this guy at 2 speed and probably be okay. I think for us, my books, I always worry about, like, I grew up pretty strapped for money, but you didn't have a lot of financial resources. And then I became a cop, and you're not going to make a heck of a lot of money as a cop either. So for me to buy a book and spend $15 on a book, if you're, and eventually these books will come into that range. When they start off, they'll eventually come in. Even my apologetics books, they might start off at $20. But eventually, as you sell them, they will come down to about this, on Amazon, about $15. But for me to spend $15 on a book when I was, a younger guy, that was prohibitive. I mean, I didn't have $15 in discretionary income to spend on a book. And so when I became an author, I thought, well, look, if we're going to end up having to charge that, because that's what the publisher sets, I don't get to set that price, then we're going to I want to make sure we pack this thing so that people feel like they got their $15 worth. And so that view has always guided what I create. I mean, I want to illustrate it. Do I need illustrations in a book? No, I'm not talking about this book. I'm talking about my apologetics books. Do I need illustrations in Cold Case Christianity? Well, probably not really, but I put 300 in there because I felt like I want those. Now, I'm an artist, but I didn't feel like I could do this. And people ask me, did you draw this? Because I draw everything else. I'm like, no, that's a whole nother level of art that is truly. And when I see these guys that Jimmy's talking about that ended up working on our book, when I see their other stuff, I'm like, wow, yeah, there's some really gifted artists in this space. And they're very, also one of the things about being a gifted artist is not just that it looks good, is that you can do it quickly because you're an artist. I've seen guys who can, like, I'm trying to rough out the scene, and get the proportions right. And then I'll go over it more with ink, and get all, no, these guys are starting in a corner, and sometimes they'll just start before I can etch a sketch. They're completely done with the thing. And you're going, wow, that's a gift. So yeah, so we're just glad that we had somebody who was gifted to do that. Right. So.
Yeah, until I was some segment there. On to the next question, which is, what is it like the general breakdown of the storyline behind Case Files? Because here there's going to be another volume, and just like how much of it, most I will add, how much of it is, as you say, it's inspired by some of the cases. But if you could give me like a arbitrary number, or like this has happened, but we added our own spice to it kind of thing for this story. But our spoilers, of course, because I made sure not to do mine with any spoilers. It's like, if you could give me like because knowing the rule of crime, there's like wild things that happen. So like, which one is like actual what percentage of it is like this actually happened, and what percent of it is like we made this up from scratch?
Okay, I'll let Jimmy answer that question.
Well, I don't want to diminish the excitement of this by saying it's all made up. I think, especially because I'm still working in law enforcement, I was very sensitive to the idea. I don't want to be telling true stories in the sense that these are, you could read this book and you could identify, oh, this is this victim from this place and this is their real name. And I'm giving away either confidential information that should protect the victim or confidential information that's just not available to the public or whatever. So in that sense, it's not that these events actually occurred, but what we wanted to do was create stories that felt real. These could happen. They're not, hey, this is a comic book. We're trying to tell a story and we're trying to move fast and make it exciting. So I don't know that these are like, there's not a serial killer attacking people in LA County like every day. It's still rare to find a serial killer. But if a killer like this was actually out there, what would the team of detectives probably look like and what would they probably do? I think that those things are real in that sense. These characters are all very typical. I think probably when we look at the individual characters that are in the team of detectives that are investigating this crime, each one of those, like my dad would probably say, oh, this person is totally like this person I worked with. And I would probably say, they're totally like this other person that I worked with. And they're totally two different people, but they're just similar enough because in law enforcement, you get the job kind of ends up molding you in a certain way. There's certain personality and characteristics that you could take on that might make you a better cop. It might not make you a better person, but it might make you a better cop. And the main kind of character in this story is Murph. Murph is a disgruntled, kind of bitter old cop who's at the end of his career, but he loves being a cop. This is his whole identity. And if you were like that, you actually probably would be a really good cop because if all that you live for is doing police work, you're going to be really effective because you're giving your whole heart to it. But because you're giving your whole heart to it, you're going to be constantly kind of impacted by all the negative, evil things that you're going to experience over a whole career, especially if you're working in homicides where now you're constantly dealing with violent crime and people doing really heinous things to each other. What are you going to end up like? You're going to probably end up like Murph. And there's a ton of people. Murph is not a real person, but there's a ton of Murphs out there in law enforcement. I mean, it's a trope in like a lot of detective stories, but it's because it's very true. And that's kind of where some of the inspiration for the story came from. Yes, we want to tell a detective story that feels real, but one of the things that I've been a Christian the whole time that I was a police officer, and I noticed that the people around me, including me at different times, really took a lot of identity in their work. This was like who they were. They would let their marriages fall apart as long as they could get onto the special team or get the promotion they were looking for. Because what was going to validate them and give them value was at work above everything else. And this can be really great if you want to be a really good police officer. If the job is all that you have and know you might be really good when you're at work, but it's not really good to answer why are you valuable? Because in the end, like Murph is experiencing at the beginning of the story, Murph at the very beginning, even though his whole identity is tied around being this great cop, this great detective, he has nothing else. And now he's eligible for retirement. And what happens when he retires? Who is he even going to be? Will he have any value at all? All in his mind, all his value comes from what he does. And I thought that was a perfect segue over into Christian apologetics because there's this great apologetic argument, which has to answer the question. I think this is a question everyone has to answer, which is, do human beings have value? And if so, where does it come from? If you think everyone has equal value, or even if you think, no, some people really do have more value than others, regardless of your opinion, you have to be able to point to something to say, this is why they actually have value that goes beyond my opinion, or the opinion of the culture, what my boss thinks of me, what my wife thinks of me, these things that can change day to day. So the story is fictional, but I hope that it is real in the sense that the characters feel real. And this is a real problem that we all have to wrestle with. I mean, even outside of law enforcement, is where do we get our value from? Are we really valuable? And how do we answer that?
Yeah, and I'll just add one last. I know I don't want us to run out of time here, but I'll just take up a few more minutes to say something about that. I think Jimmy's right. Why is it that you see these shows on TV where it seems like there are these like caricatures of cops or detectives that always appear. And you could probably just do a quick scan of like the top 10 detective stories on TV, detective shows, and you can probably find the similar types in each series. They've just been given slightly different names or whatever, but well, why is that? I think there's a danger. There's a real thing that happens. You can imagine, do you remember back when I was a kid, they used to have rock tumblers. And what these rock tumblers would do is you put a bunch of different rocks in this machine, and it would roll the rocks in fluid, and eventually it would smooth out the rocks and they would come out really polished. The same way that if you put rocks in a stream and you leave them over time and the water moves them down the stream, that they grind along and they come out at the end, you have smooth pebbles. And I don't care if you started with rough agate or some kind of iron core, or you start with a broken piece of glass. At the end of the process, they all come out looking kind of similar, and they're much worse for wear, but they get, so what happens is that people come into this job and they bring all their individual personalities, but they sometimes come out looking the same. Like it's hard to retain what was you when you came in, that your naivete is going to be taken away from you. A lot of your patience is going to be tested. Your perception of humans is going to probably start to conform to what everybody else's perception is, because you're all seeing the same thing and experiencing the same thing. So this is a book, I hope, that starts to delve into that and just ask the question, like, what makes us unique? What gives us value? That's the idea of the story, is they're hunting a serial killer who is going to target what the culture thinks are increasingly valuable targets. It starts off with somebody who's homeless. And why do we think that that's not worth working? Why do we think that that case is not as important as a celebrity who gets murdered? Why is it that someone like this can get killed in America and nobody will even report it on the news? Yet the celebrity gets killed, it'll be a national, international headline. Like, why do we think that one person has got more value than another? We want to explore that because we think the best answer for how you could determine someone's value is not in their celebrity or what they've achieved, or how much money they have, or what family they came from. It's going to be we are image bearers of the God who created us. And we want to be able to talk about that as a better answer to the question, but we want to do it in a way that doesn't smack you in the face from the very first, panel. If we want to do it in a way that is subtle, and then when all of the characters in this are struggling with the answer, we're going to float an answer that we think is the best answer. But it's also going to leave people, I think, thinking about, well, is that the best answer? And I want to start a conversation. When you read this book, I hope you want to talk about it. And I hope if you give it to somebody, they're going to want to talk to you about it. And that's where these conversations begin a journey. That's the kind of thing that starts. I've got family members right now who I'm having conversations with them, and it's beginning with questions like this. It turns out if I'd have started with just the gospel, they would have said, yeah, okay, heard it before. But if I can start this way, they realize, no, it turns out the gospel is the good news about salvation. But with that comes the good news about a lot of other things, like human value, like identity, like grounding moral truths, like making sense of the world that we live in. Those things come along with the gospel. And so we want to be able to, and so if you've got people who say, I don't want to hear the gospel, well, how about we just talk about the good things that come along with it? That might open your mind to being willing to listen to the gospel. And that's what we hope this book will do.
No, that's awesome. As you say, it doesn't hit you in the face on page 1. I'll say it hits you in the gut on page 154. Because when I read it, I was like, wow. You guys, I covered it in the review because I felt like I have to read this page for the audience. So that page and that ending conversation with Joe and Murph, I was like, yeah, it ain't gonna hit you on page 1, but it hits you on that last 10 pages. So it's like, yeah, that was, as I said, that was a perfect bow to wrap the book up with, in my opinion. That's first like where just to hear that, just the inspirations and the apologetics background that went into that. I was like, you guys nailed that for me personally. Definitely.
Oh, that's good. That's so good. That's so good to hear. And that's encouraging because that's what's kind of the goal of this. If we'd done all of this and had a great action-packed fiction book, and we didn't at least introduced the concepts that caused us to want to do it in the first place, I think we would have missed the mark altogether. So that's encouraging for us to hear, for sure.
Yeah, it's very edifying, because this is something that we feel in our gut when we see people struggling and with their sense of purpose or value, especially people we've worked with, and we feel like we have the answer, not like in we want to shove it in your face, we have the answer, why couldn't you figure it out? But it's like heartbreaking to see someone not see the answer is just God. God has created you and has a purpose for you and sees value in you. And so I'm glad to hear that had some sort of emotional resonance, that somehow the way we were feeling about it came across on the page. Is very edifying.
That's good. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, Jimmy, in your last segment, you just took through like 4 of the questions all in one, talking about move, which is awesome to hear you go through it like that. So
you know what? I didn't want to run along too long, and also because I have a 1-week-old baby in the other room, I have to go and get a few minutes. But also, I just want to make sure that if we want to be respectful of your time too. But also, I want to make sure that we're expressing the apologetic argument of the book. We want the book to make you feel and think about things, but also we hope that we're getting across the idea that every person, whether they are Christian or not, who's watching this video, I'm sure they all think that someone has value. Hopefully they think they themselves have value. If they are struggling with that, they think someone else has value, but we all have to ground it in something. And there's really not a good answer for why human beings would have value, other than that there is something transcendent that is outside of the place you live in, the time you live in, the community you live in, something that is totally transcendent, bigger than humanity itself, that has an opinion that you have value and that will not change. That's the only way for you to have true, actual value that isn't kind of like fickle, that today you did a good job, so you have value, tomorrow you suck, so therefore you don't have value. And we'll have to answer this question. I think only as Christians, we have the good answer for why other people have value, and we should protect them and we should treat them well. But I actually think that a lot of people do not have a good answer. They probably have no answer at all for why they think they or anyone else has value.
Yeah. Let me, okay. So look, now we're going to do the speed round because we're down to 3 minutes, but here's what I'm going to say. Okay. Here's what I'm going to say. Look, I think it's really important for what we're doing, what you're doing, and what I'm doing, and what Jimmy is doing. We're doing the same thing. We're trying to help the world see that Christianity is not just true, that it's beautiful, it's good.
Yeah.
It offers something that is life-giving. And that's why it's important for you. I want to encourage you. You need to keep it going. There's going to be times when you're going to feel like, do I need to? No, you push through those times, because it turns out the project you're involved in is the second part. Is Christianity beautiful enough that when you express it through art or music or literature or whatever it may be, that it takes a top billing, that it's actually worth reading, it's worth singing, it's worth watching. So I just want to encourage you. This is what this channel does, and that's why we wanted to be on this channel. Now, if you wanted to take the next step, okay, it seems like it's interesting, but now where do I go from here? Well, that's what we're trying to do at coldcasechristianity.com. If you just go to that website, coldcasechristianity.com, you'll see that if you purchase this book, we don't want you to spend the money on it and not get an even bigger value. So anyone who purchases the book, we're going to send them a free digital book that will make a case for the resurrection, another digital pamphlet that'll help you have conversations about this topic with your friends. But more importantly, a 30-session, 10.5-hour course that is a seminary course I've designed for a seminary here in California that will teach you the case for Christianity and how to communicate it to others. So what we hope is that this is a gateway book for your unbelieving friends to maybe for the first time consider Christianity, and for believers to take a plunge and become better Christian case makers so they can share the gospel with others. So I think in the end, I'd love it if there was enough robust material out there that if you wanted to buy a comic book as a Christian, a comic book that expressed a Christian worldview, that you could never run out of things to read. Right now, it kind of feels like if I did that, I might run out of things to read at some point. So we're trying to contribute, but more importantly, this is how Jimmy learned about a lot of the Christian comic books that he now talks about. He learned them from you. So don't get tired. Just keep on doing what you're doing. It's going to be important. Okay.
Thank you for that encouragement. And I think that's a perfect way to end off here. I mean, it's been an honor. I mean, you guys say it's an honor, but for me, it's more of an honor. It's also your guys, so that's all about honor. To sit down with you guys on the 19th installment of the podcast, guys. You can get all the links for get the book for yourself. And it is my favorite book that we have covered on the channel thus far. Link for it will be in the description below for all things J. Warner Wallace and Jimmy Wallace. You can find it down in the description below. Thanks for watching, and thanks you guys for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.